Yeah, boy, it's June 23rd, and it's my 14th wedding anniversary, boys. Happy anniversary, Anti-Buckets. It's episode 78, and this is the Fantasy Football Auctioneer. I'm your host, Uncle Buckets. The Fantasy Football Auctioneer is the official podcast of the fantasyfootballauction.com, the internet's only website dedicated to fantasy football auctions. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/fantasyfootballauctioneer. Or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at the handle at Fantasy Auction. Tonight we have a great show for you. Tonight we're looking at Slim's wide receiver research. We're going to take a look at tiers and values and drafting strategy, all for wide receivers. We've even got a couple of questions from the listeners too. But of course, the experts, they're always here. He's getting ready to teach some summer school. That was kind of a bad movie in the 90s, Slim. How you doing tonight? Summer school? No? You're too young.
No, that wasn't a good movie. You're right.
No, it wasn't. But remember the horror movie guys, Chainsaw, and you remember those guys?
What do you mean? The movies?
There was two characters in that movie. I think it was Summer School. Anyways, I'm going on a whole other thing. How you doing tonight, son?
I was doing good until I got to think about this crap.
I'll pull it up. We'll do some screen share later. I don't know.
Lovely.
Lovely.
No, I'm doing good, though. Doing
All
good.
Right, good.
Top receivers, though.
All right. You seemed rather excited texting back and forth. I got a baby even in a beer mug, so that's good stuff. And after he's done banging around his microphone, and he's into the World Cup so much that he's even tweeting about it. Blister. Football?
It was a little anticlimactic today. Greece sneaking through on a dive to get them a penalty kick in the last dying seconds. But you got to expect that's going to happen with the amount that goes on. But there's been some good games, though. It's been kind of enjoyable. It'll be interesting to see once this first round is over how our pools are going to shake out.
Italy.
Speaking of that, I want to get
Spain
I want to get your comment. What are they gonna do with Suarez in this biting thing again?
It's just, it's unbelievable. And who should ever have to say biting thing again? Biting thing is bad enough to say.
Three times.
You said that
times
to
in 4 years. It's unbelievable, and he went after him too.
See, poor parenting.
Well, you can make a teeth joke here probably. There's a lot of things you could go to, but I don't know.
I wouldn't go there since it was your anniversary, but I'm not. Didn't want to touch it. Sorry.
They could really throw the book at him. I was
they won't.
listening to Sirius after the game. There's talks of 6 and 9 month bans. It's multiple offenses. It's blatant. I don't know.
But FIFA doesn't roll like that, do they?
No, they don't. And that's the thing. He's a star, right? So they tend to skimp on it, and it's a pretty shady organization, old FIFA too. So.
Wow, that's what I was gonna say. I guess that's how big they are. When they don't care at all what the public perception is of whatever they decide to do. Even the NFL cares, and would if the backlash was too strong, they might in the future, change things up. But it seems like they just don't. Whatever.
I don't know what it'll be. I'd be really surprised if you see him again in this World Cup. You got to think that they got to be pulling the plug on that right away. It's been such a great World Cup, high scoring. Teams are moving forward. There's been some flopping and stuff, but for the most part,
that's soccer, though, right?
But it could be worse. I think for the North American fan, who's usually pretty neutral, this has got to be pretty exciting because it's wide open out there. And you see some of the big teams getting upset, and that's kind of fun to watch too. So going forward, my pool looks good though, boys. It looks good so far. Italy going down hurts for a lot, but anyways, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I thought that game was a weird one to watch altogether. Balotelli's jumping, trying to get a piggyback on that guy when he's already on a yellow.
He's an idiot though too. He's one of those other guys.
It doesn't matter anymore. Anyways, can't play in the next round because they're not in the next round. But anyways, it's neither here nor there. Let's move on to American-style football, guys. Got it?
Yes.
Got it. All right. So if you guys are ready, then I'm ready. Let's cock the hammer. It's time for action. All right, so like we said, we're going to talk wide receivers tonight. We had a real good talk last week, the quarterback position, breaking down tiers and values and strategies. So this week we're going to take a look at wide receivers. But before we get into wide receivers, let's take a look at a couple of listener questions, one posted on the website and one via Twitter. So Slim, we'll let you tackle this first one. I don't know if I want to read the whole thing out. It's about an auction keeper league. He can keep some players. He's looking at should he keep Jamal Charles, DeMarco Murray, Reggie Bush, Gio Bernard, Crabtree. He's also looking maybe to make a trade up for LaShawn McCoy. So these are some of the options that he's looking at, and then thinking moving forward maybe of attacking a top 3 quarterback or top wide receivers. So Slim, what do you think? Auction keeper league, should he be keeping any of these running backs in particular, or should he be making that move for Shady?
Well, I look at it and I think I would try to make the trade for McCoy, because that gives you Jamal Charles, DeMarco Murray, and LaShawn McCoy all of a sudden as your nucleus of running backs, which I think any fantasy owner would love to have. You give up Reggie Bush and Bernard, but I mean, really, Reggie Bush, not the end of the world, and Gio Bernard, yeah, he's young and up and coming, but I mean, McCoy's not that much older, and to me, the production you're going to get from McCoy in the next couple years is going to offset the age of Bernard. So, I would make that trade. And then he asked something about what he should do in the draft then, and there should be some elite receivers there, and should he go quarterback early? I say no. I say take your first 2 picks and you go wide receiver, wide receiver. If you can get an elite guy like Des Bryant or something, he thought he might be available, then and another solid receiver, maybe someone in the range of, say, Antonio Brownish or something in the next round. All of a sudden, your lineup is Jamal Charles, LaShawn McCoy, DeMarco Murray, Des Bryant, and Antonio Brown. And so who cares who your quarterback is? I don't care if you got Drew Brees or Ben Roethlisberger. You know, your team is sick. And if you take Brees early, you're not going to end up with that elite wide receiver. I know it's an auction, but it's still, again, you don't have to spend big money on a quarterback to get top production. We've said that over and over.
Last week, yeah.
Exactly. Listen to any pod; they tell you the same. Whether it's ADP, auction, whatever. There's a reason people are saying it. It works. So don't think you got to go and spend big money on a quarterback. I don't care what the format.
Right, and we talked a lot about that last week, so head on over to the website, thefantasyfootballauction.com/episode 77. You can find the show notes there. You can also find a link to last week's video or the podcast as well, so you can listen to all the things we talked about with quarterbacks, and I thought it was really good stuff last week. A little bit off the cuff, but really good auction talk, so... Yeah, good stuff. I think you're exactly right. I don't know if he's playing in a 4-team league there, but that would be a pretty sick backfield with those 3. I mean, you're looking at DeMarco Murray as your flex, and you're starting Jamal Charles and LaShawn McCoy. Ain't too shabby.
That's
as Adam Sandler would say, ain't too shabby. Right? That's the Hanukkah song? Anyways, maybe I could find that.
Shabakwa, isn't it? Something
Hey, too Shabakwa. That too. Okay, so Blister, let's move on to you. Twitter question from @RobT15. He asks you, Blister, I guess, what percentage of your budget are you looking to spend on wide receivers this year? And is that a change from last season? Blister, what say you about your wide receiver budget?
Well, last year I ended up spending $89 on wide receivers, so that was between 40 and 50% of my budget, or closer to about 45% of my budget, wasn't it? So my big spend was Julio Jones last year at $39. So obviously we know how that worked out, not too good. But then I had 4 receivers between 10 and 13, and that was Josh Gordon, who was a steal. James Jones 11. Gordon was 10. Jones 11. Stevie Johnson 12. Cecil Shorts 13. And really after Gordon, those next 3 guys didn't work out, and neither did my lower budget one. So I spent $89 on receivers. And then I did a couple mocks so far there just the other day, and on one draft I spent 104 on receivers, and the other one I spent 89. And actually, so in my instance, I probably will be spending somewhere again around 90 to $100 on receivers. So I'm thinking anywhere between 40 to 50% of my budget will be spent on receivers this year, especially given the fact that we're probably looking at, in most situations, I think we'll be playing in PPR format. So I think they have a little more value as well in that situation. So that's what I'm looking at based on what I've done so far in my mocks this year. Spending that kind of money on receivers, I was still able to get some really quality starting running backs. My starting running backs on my teams in my mocks have been Monty Ball, Gio Bernard, Le'Veon Bell. I got Andre Ellington. Who else did I grab for? And then my guys that are backups and stuff. I even got Gerhardt in one, Bryce Brown, Terrence West and stuff like that. So in my mind, in the drafts I've done so far, I've been really happy with my receivers. I guess maybe I should, in one draft where I spent 104, it was Cobb, Nelson, Garcon, Mike Wallace, Cecil Shorts, Tavon Austin, and Golden Tate. That was my receivers. And I'd be very happy to get those guys. In the draft, I spent 89. I went a little higher. In the first draft I just mentioned, the most expensive guy was Jordy Nelson at 32. And then in the second one, I got A.J. Green for 39, and Keenan Allen for 23, Shorts, Cobb, and Kendall Wright, and I spent only 89. So even that crew is not too bad. So yeah, I think in my mind I'll probably spend somewhere around the same place, between 40 to 50% of my money on receivers.
Well, and Blister did talk about his news from the mocks and taking a look at some different strategies. From what he's seen so far in the mock auctions, you can head over to the website, thefantasyfootballauction.com/articles, and you can check out the article there. And also Slim's got a wicked picture of Julio Jones and Patrick Swayze on his article. And in Blister's article, we've got everything from Muppet News Flash to Tecmo Bowl. It's and some pretty charts too. So a quick little read, but good stuff on what's going on so far in your mock auctions. So good stuff, Blister. I think I'm about like you too as far as my wide receiver budget goes. Last year I spent $72. I went big on Dez at 45, Wes Welker at 14, and then I nickeled and dimed my way. I picked a lot of guys under that $5 range. Hit on one of them with Julian Edelman. Pretty good for a wide receiver 3, and in a PPR would be obviously a lot larger as well. So I spent $72, and I think that's about where I'm going to be gunning for this year. Tentatively anyways, things always change, but if we were going to draft today, I think that if I could find some decent value at big name running backs, I think I'm still looking at maybe going that way and then trying to spread the wealth a little bit at the wide receiver position. And I think that looking through the charts that we're going to look at later on in this episode might help to back some of that up. But again, like Slim, we always say, right, you got to be able to roll with the punches, and if something good comes along, you can't be afraid to jump on it and then reevaluate, go to plan B, C, or D, and we rework that budget to make the best team you can, right?
Yeah, true, and I think we'll get into that probably a couple of weeks from now. I think we'll do kind of a strategy podcast, more or less, that kind of we'll get into some more advanced kind of strategy and stuff like that. But yeah, you've got to be able to, break, your budget that you start with. And I think this year, right now, I'm shooting for anywhere up to 50% of my budget could go to wide receivers, quite frankly. Especially if you maybe want to spend a decent amount of money on a running back. And from what I've seen in mocks, people are going insane with the high-end running backs, and there's no way I'm spending over $60 on any of them. So if that's what you had budgeted, maybe then you'd throw a whole bunch of money at the wide receiver position then and load up on some of these tier 2 wide receivers that will finish as wide receiver 1. So yeah, it's all like you said about being flexible, but you got to have a budget when you go in.
Yeah, you got to have a game plan for sure before you head in. So, and I think you're right. If running backs start hitting $65, I'm backing out pretty quick for those top end guys, and you're right, reworking that budget. So good stuff. So we're going to move on. Again, you can ask us questions. Tonight we had one question right there from the website, just comments at the bottom of the site, and we also had a Twitter question as well at Fantasy Auction. So you can hit us up anytime. Usually all three of us we'll answer back. One of us usually almost instantaneously, especially now in the summer months when we have a little bit more time on our hands. Anyways, let's move on to wide receivers, guys. Well, I guess we already were talking wide receivers, but let's take a look at Slim, what you worked on as far as the latest update of the draft kit and what that's going to look like. Last week we looked at quarterbacks. This week, wide receivers, and again we'll take a look at the graph that looks at wide receiver production and auction values for 2013 to see if we can see any trends in the tiers. So Slim, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you saw when making the chart and I guess what that means for you as you move forward.
Yeah, no, again, kept plotting the positions. I think the first thing that jumped out to me was just how much better the top guys are. And I don't mean better as in outproducing everybody else by a wide range. Like, we're not looking at a Jimmy Graham situation here amongst other tight ends or something like that. But I had 6 guys ranked in the top 2 tiers. And, it's the common names: Calvin Johnson, Des Bryant, A.J. Green, Brandon Marshall, Demaryius Thomas, Julio Jones. I think, for the most part, all 6 of those guys are in the top of your rankings at wide receiver this year. With the exception of Julio Jones, obviously because of injury, even though he was on pace for a massive year, which I kind of touch on in an article that's on the website. All 6 of those guys were top receiving options. They finished in the top 10. So when you buy one of those guys, one of these elite, we'll call them elite options, you're more or less getting your money's worth, to me, more than any other position, whether it's quarterback or tight end, running back, doesn't matter. You can expect the most consistent production from these top guys. So it stands to reason that, hey, if I'm going to spend $50 on a player, do I want to do it on a running back or a wide receiver? Well, based on the stats and the consistency, I want to do it on a receiver. And, Blister, I know he's a big advocate of this. He's touched on it lots. The running back position it's volatile. We know about the injuries that can happen, but just the chances of these elite guys repeating that performance, it's a lot less than it is for a wide receiver, for various reasons, injury being one of them. Yeah, so when I saw that, it really jumped out to me. And also, when you look at, say, the top 24 receivers, so if you're in a league where you start 2 wide receivers, and you look at the top 24 guys that finished last year, take away those 6, say those 5 without Julio, the rest come from all kinds of every other tier, more or less, from guys that were even untiered by me. For example, Julian Edelman, he finished as a top 24 wide receiver. I didn't have him even worthy of being drafted, or if he did, it was a buck. And Beckett, I think you snagged him for a buck or 2, so there you go. But yeah, it was just it was really interesting to see the range of, every tier has the potential to have a top fantasy. Even a wide receiver 1, even a top 12 wide receiver, every tier has the potential to have a guy in there. So now you got to pay attention and try and really target who that's going to be.
Right. So I mean, it's sorry, I was just getting ready for the next part here. I thought that's where I like the fact that you see consistency out of that dollar value. Hey, Blister, like knowing if you're willing to spend the money, that at least you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to get that value. Whereas when we look at running backs or quarterbacks, it's not necessarily always the place. Like, what are some things that you saw out of that chart that kind of tweaked your interest or is going to help you moving forward?
Well, I kind of put together some stats myself, looking at the receiving numbers from the past couple of years, and I compared that with the running backs, and that was that last article I did just for our website too, and I think it was around 70% of the receivers that were top 10 in 2012 were top 10 again in 2013. So again, it's that consistency versus at running back, it might have been about 30%, 3 to the top 10, where again repeated at top 10, right? So like we were just like you guys said, and we've said it many times, if you're gonna drop $50 or more on one single player, there's a little more security in doing that on a receiver. They seem to be able to have to repeat. maybe stay a little healthier. Last year it was bad luck when I took Julio, but I mean that was the guy I spent the most money on at receiver, and I expected a big year out of him, and
Yeah,
he
and
slipped
if he
through those
doesn't
big
get
fine.
hurt, he's going to be one of those guys anyways, right? So
Yeah. So,
predict that.
and you can't, I mean, in some situations, not so much with receiver, but with running back, you know that some of these guys have a little more tread on the tires, and they've had a lot of touches over the past years, and history and stats show time and time again that these guys will wear down. But you don't have that, at running back that is, but you don't have that same comparison at receiver. As they get older and older, I guess they might slow or lose a step, but for the most part, as long as they have, the quarterback still got a great offensive line or whatever, and a good arm and a good quarterback, if those things tend to stay consistent a little bit longer, and because of that, receivers tend to put up, consistent numbers year in and year out.
Yeah,
Top guys.
And I like that, and so then that kind of works when you're building your team. I think when you're looking at, well, how much money am I going to spend a wide receiver position? Let's try to nail one of those tier 1, tier 2 positions so that we can get our guaranteed wide receiver 1. And then I like how it kind of lends itself to then let's pick up 2 or 3 tier 6 guys all of a sudden and hope that you hit on one of them as your wide receiver 2. And then you can, by looking at this anyways, again, small sample size, it's only last year, but looking at this, all of a sudden your undrafted guys working that waiver wire and paying attention to who's starting to heat up and picking them up before they blow up can really work to your benefit for that wide receiver 3. Having the consistency, spending the big money, knowing you're going to have someone there, and then being able to spread the wealth, I think, might really pay off for you, hey, Slim?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you kind of, mentioned that. I mean, I've kind of always been of the belief, I've usually been running back fairly heavy, as you guys know. So I try to save as much money as I can at the receiver. And, I try to always, if my wide receiver 1 for my team usually came from, tier 3 or something like that. And I tried to get a high upside guy. Last year it was Jordy Nelson. And like you said, we do in our main auction, we start 3 wide receivers. I know that's maybe not as common as it wouldn't be, say, the majority of scoring systems set up that way, but and my wide receiver 3, like you said, is a guy that I'm trying to hit a home run with that I can get for $5 to $10, depending on how my budget is at the end of this draft. So then you think, each of these tiers only has so many players in it, right? The top tiers tend to be smaller than the bigger tiers, so some of these numbers can maybe get skewed when you start graphing, because obviously you're going to graph the top, say, 3 guys from the 6th tier, whereas in tier 1 maybe there is only 3 guys. So I kind of looked at the percentage of who finishes as a wide receiver 1 or 2 in each tier. What's the percentage of all these receivers? And the results to me kind of jumped out. Like you said, tier 6 was big. 71% of the receivers in that tier finished as a wide receiver 1 or 2. Obviously, tier 1, 100%. Tier 2 was 67%, and that's because Julio Jones got hurt. I'm sure that would have been 100% as well.
Yeah.
And then you go to tier 3 was 33%. Tier 4, 50%. Tier 5, 20%. And then you get going, and 33% for tier 7, and tier 8 was 15. But I think what it showed you can go all the way down to tier 6, and if you averaged it out, maybe you're probably looking at close to a 60% success rate for any of those receivers picked in the top 7 tiers or top 6 tiers to finish as a wide receiver 1 or 2. Whereas if you did that with the running backs, I mean, to get a 60% success rate, I couldn't even imagine what the percentage would be. You're probably looking at something closer to 40%, I would think, maybe for running backs. Blister might know a little bit more just to have a ballpark, but because he's looked at it a little closer than I have. But I don't know. I mean, to me that says, hey, I can wait. I can take an elite guy. Maybe I want to spend $40 and get somebody like Antonio Brown, even a high upside guy that's not going to go anywhere near the money that Calvin Johnson or Demaryius Thomas does, but could very well finish right on par with them. And then, like you said, Bex, you load up on guys that are in the $15 range. And just you could make, if you were to draft 4 wide receivers, even one guy for your bench, you would end up with a pretty solid receiving core if you
I'm
took
looking at the numbers.
like
If you're rolling into 2013 draft, let's say, right, last year, and you're looking at the tiers and what the values turned out to be, let's say you go Des Bryant or Brandon Marshall, that's $45, about the middle of those tier 1, tier 2 guys, so 45. Let's say you roll over and grab tier 6 guys, Antonio Brown. Let's throw in a James Jones. You're hoping he was going to hit, so there's $25 there. So now you're at $70, and I mean, you've got wide receiver 1 and 2 covered. And now, if you wanted to spend like what Blister was talking about, somewhere in that $80 to $90 range, now you've got $10 that you can roll on to
Josh Gordon.
Some of those lower end guys and hope that they hit. Or hope that you find this year's Keenan Allen or Alshon Jeffrey or, those types of guys that are going to go at relatively, $1 or $2 or undrafted. I mean, we look at that left quadrant of the chart, Alshon Jeffrey, but Julian Edelman, Keenan Allen undrafted, right? Michael Floyd, these guys, maybe you hit on that, and you can roll 5 or 6 of those guys if you really wanted to have, PPR depth on your bench, let's say. So, I mean, that's not a bad little roster, especially moving into 2013. You're going to start Brandon Marshall, Antonio Brown, and then, maybe you got lucky on Alshon. Studs.
Well, that's it. There was some studs that, let's face it, Josh Gordon, Blister drafted him fairly cheap last year. Alshon Jeffrey, obviously Keenan Allen. There's, lots of guys like that last year, but why can't there be this year too?
Right.
I mean, if you start looking really, further down the list, I mean, maybe somebody like Tavon Austin breaks out. Or we've talked about some guys, we like Golden Tate. Terrence Williams is a popular breakout candidate. Things like that. Maybe Kenny Stills emerges in New Orleans. And we're not saying they're going to be a top 10 wide receiver necessarily, but if you buy somebody for $5, you don't even care if they are. Even if they finish as the 17th or 20th, that's amazing value, right? I mean, very rarely you're going to find Josh Gordon what he did last year, but go ahead, Lister.
Well, the thing is, what I was really shocked about is, but from doing a couple mocks, and I strongly urge people to do it just to get a feel for what these prices are. I mean, we know, like some of the names you mentioned, Terrence Williams and some of these names that we thought, have some hype. Even Kendall Wright, he could be in line for a big year, and different guys like that. And you'd think, well, everyone's gonna be thinking about them, everyone's gonna be talking about them. But there's so many other names ahead of them that it's just, it's inevitable that people are gonna have a lot of money spent. So if you really think hard about where you want to spend your money and what you're gonna have left over, like for example, like you said, in the auction right now, like Peyton Manning's going for over $50 in every one I've been in so far. Yeah. There's 8 or 9 running backs that are going for $50 or more, and one time I think there was 5 that went for over $60. The big name receivers, Calvin Johnson, Demarius, AJ, like 4 or 5 or 6 of them guys are going for 45 plus. But when you start adding it all up, I mean, a lot of people, Jimmy Graham was going for around 44 or 45. I mean, if you see how much money is gone and from each of these teams, all of a sudden, you're going to think, well, I'm going to have to budget so much for a lot of these guys. But Terrence Williams, I mean, he's going for $1 or $2. Who was I shocked with? Even Randall Cobb. I mean, Randall Cobb in every one was only going for about $17 or $18. But by the time he came off the board, people had spent so much money on all the other guys. I mean, Randall Cobb for $17 could be a wide receiver 1 next year. That's a hell of a value. And Kendall Wright was $30.
Yeah, it was the same thing.
Yeah. Mike Wallace was 7.
Wow. But yeah, I said to one of the guys, I drafted Julio Jones for 40, which, whatever, I thought was low. It was somebody I was maybe going to look at anyway. But then all of a sudden, Alshon Jeffrey was out there for bidding. I had no intention of buying him.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he went for $28, and I was like, this isn't what I wanted to spend on my wide receiver too, but this is too cheap. I'm not letting somebody get him for this. And so I said to the guy, I'm like, well, look at the values here. And his comment was, wow, everybody overspent. And I'm like, I get that. I mean, that's the math of it. But I can't believe that people aren't looking at some of these names. And I ended up getting Randall Cobb as my 3rd wide receiver for $24. So I
Really?
mean, for
Yeah.
Julio for
$100 or
40,
whatever.
which I thought was a deal. Alshon Jeffrey for 28, which I thought was a really good deal, and Randall Cobb for 24, which I thought was a really good deal. I had 3 potential wide receiver ones as my starting wideouts. I mean,
That's pretty damn good.
I was shocked. I mean, I didn't
Keenan
spend
Allen
tons
is
on
another
running
guy.
back.
Keenan Allen right
Yeah.
now is another guy that can definitely be a wide receiver 1, and I've seen him going for around, well, averaging about $23 right now.
Yeah, I was going to
So
say.
that's, if you could spend 40 on, let's say AJ or Julio or somebody like that, Brandon Marshall, or you could save it and spend 23 to get Keenan Allen and Randall Cobb for the same price. I mean, you could, you'd have 2 wide receiver ones instead of 1. Otherwise, you could end up with Brandon Marshall and who knows? Maybe it's Mike Wallace, but still costing you more money than those other 2 guys. So I mean, it's really going to come down to your draft and stuff. But what I think could happen, especially if the running backs continue to go for big bucks, then there's going to be some excellent receivers available for $20 and less compared to the $45 ones.
I was just going to say that, Blister. If it's me and I'm in a draft and I see, it probably say the first 5 nominations. Someone's going to nominate McCoy. Someone's probably going to nominate Charles or Manning or Calvin Johnson, whatever. You know who's more or less going to be nominated near the top. If you see those guys going for $55, $60, $65, I can tell you right there within the first 5 picks, I know whatever my strategy was, I'm changing it to I'm going to wait and load up then on some kind of mid-tier wide receivers, because guys that typically should be going for 30 are all of a sudden going to be going for 20, $15. I'll make a receiver part of that all day.
Would you flip that then and hope that the tier 1 elite guys then drop as well? Or do you think they're still going to go for top dollar too?
I don't know. From what I've seen in mocks, everyone has been spending huge on, like Blister said, we thought the running back phenomenon we kind of saw last year of 10 running backs going for over $50 was going to be over this year, and I think both of us have seen that that's not the case at all. And Peyton Manning, he's going for, I agree, he goes for over $45 regularly, which to me is insane, even though he is probably the most consistent, or you're going to get a good season with him.
Right.
But yeah, like I said, I can't believe that I still can get Julio Jones personally for $40. To me, all those 6 guys should be going for over $45. That's my opinion. And then it's all of a sudden you're talking, now you're kind of splitting hairs with Jordy Nelson, Antonio Brown, Randall Cobb, Jeffrey. It's who you think is going to emerge from that group. And they're going for, in my opinion, they should be going for right under $40. And oftentimes they're going for less than 30. So, I mean, you might not get one of these elite, and I say elite, I'm meaning these top 6 wide receivers for, say, under $40. But okay, if you don't, all right, I'll just go and take Jordy Nelson and Antonio Brown then, and be happy with that. So, like I said, I'm looking at what's happening in these first 5 picks. To me, that's what's going to dictate right now. That's going to dictate what's happening in the draft. And if guys are going for cheap and say I'm nominating 6th or 7th, all right, maybe I try for an elite guy. Or, if everybody's spending, I can either throw out another high-profile running back that I know I'm not going to be able to afford, or maybe I kind of throw out somebody like Julio Jones or Brandon Marshall, one of these bottom kind of elite guys, and hope that people are saying, you know what, I'm going to save my money because Demaryius Thomas is still out there, and I want to go for him or go for Calvin Johnson, and maybe you can sneak in and still get an elite guy for a fairly decent price.
I'm going to throw out 2 pieces of strategy right now. Again, one, while we're talking about this just reminds me of what I kept reiterating last year over and over and over. We used to come out early on with throwing out that kicker in the defense. And if somebody spends more than $1 on it, then, hey, you made them spend more than $1. You might be able to afford somebody down the road. I still don't want to see anybody do that. You're early on in your draft. You want people to spend big bucks. Throw out a guy that you don't want, or somebody that sure, you'd love to have Jamal Charles, but if you think he's going to cost $65, get him out there, because you don't want him for $65. You can get 2 or 3 good running backs down the road potentially for that much money, right? You can get Monty Ball and Gio Bernard for the same price as one Jamal Charles. Who would want that? Throw the guys out there that are going to cost money, because like I've said many times, if they spend big chunks of dollars, eventually they're going to tighten up their wallets. They're going to have to sit there for a while, and they're going to be scared to spend an extra buck on anything, because it's going to get down to A, they might not be able to afford anybody, or B, after they spend a couple big chunks of dollars, they're going to go away for a while, and then you can start really seeing the values in these other guys. So throw them out there. The other thing is, even when you go on a mock draft, like we've said many times, nothing is worse than drafting against all robots, or 10 out of the 12 guys are robots, something. You can still work some strategy in there, and it's kind of good to start thinking, getting your mind wrapped around strategy. If it's robots, throw out guys still that you don't want. For example, the last one I was in, we started off 12 live guys. Before it was over, we were probably down to 4. But people did at least 80% of the draft. Keenan Allen ended up going for $2, because at the end, if you kept throwing out these guys that were worth, you didn't want them, but their auction values that are listed on there, $11, $12 for these different, maybe it's Percy Howard, or maybe whoever, maybe even guys that are down the list substantially far that you have no interest in, the robots are going to bid them up to that price, and then they're going to fill up their roster. And once their roster's filled up, they can't bid on guys anymore. So use that as kind of your strategy. When you go into any auction, you should be paying attention to what your other guys have. Throwing guys out there that they might need or they don't need, or whatever the case may be, but it's all about knowing what they have, how much money they have, what positions they need to fill. And even with the robots, like I was going against them and thinking, well, I kind of like this defense. Well, I can't put this defense out there because they're valued at more than $1. So the robots will just bid them up until, but they usually only will take one defense. So if you throw somebody out there, they're going to bid it up unless it's full. But just kind of keep that in mind, because there's different strategies, and although robots are not real people, it can help you be aware of what you're going to need to do come game day.
Yeah, and knowing your room in a live draft, or even online, but knowing the guys that you're drafting with, you can kind of treat them like robots almost. Like,
well, you
certain guys and who they're going to take, or even like you're saying, Blister, situational stuff. They've drafted 10 guys. They have $11 left. How they're going to react to certain nominations and certain bids and that type of thing. You can treat them like a robot, kind of.
Yeah, you can. Like, we know in our draft, certain guys are going to favor certain players, and unless they really change, and some of them won't, because some of them will be done with certain players. Somebody won't want to spend $5 on Ryan Matthews, and different guys like that. Yeah.
But you would draft him for $5.
For $5 I would, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's definitely some things to keep in mind, because like you say, you could treat the robots as live people, or you could treat the live people as robots, but one way or the other, be aware of what everybody's doing, where they're at, how much money they have, what positions are filled, etc.
Well, I was going to mention too. I like the fact that you brought up those early nominations, and it tied into what Slim was talking about. Using those first few nominations as price setters, right? And just kind of seeing where the tiers are at, and flushing out some dollars, and trying to see like where the value is going to end up, so that 2 hours in, you're ready to roll, right? You can pounce on what's going to be there, and we look at that auction and all that type of stuff, right, Slim? Like, I mean, you gotta use that first little bit to set the price.
Well, I was just gonna say, it's something I've toyed with doing the last couple of years, and I've just been too lazy. But it's super easy. We always tell you, make your own tiers. Try and come up with some values that you think. I mean, even if you don't come up with your own values, you can use ours, for example. And maybe you don't agree with it, maybe you tweak it. But what you do is you compare it to your tiers. And you say, okay, where does things not jive here? Do I have somebody in tier 2 that's going for way less than the other guys that I have him ranked around? Okay, I'm going to take my highlighter. That's maybe somebody I'm going to really focus on, because that, to me, says a good value. But after you do that, it's super easy to take your list of, say, all your tiers, make like a top, whatever, even a top 50, and put it on a spreadsheet. And you have what you think they should go for. And as the draft starts, what you do is you put what the prices they're actually going for at the draft. and have the spreadsheet calculate, are you plus or minus where it should be right now? Is there extra money being spent, or is there a surplus? And it'll tell you really quick that either there's going to be a big surplus or there's a bunch of people sitting on their money. So you know either I'm waiting or I'm going to spend right now and get some elite talent. Because if people are sitting on their wallets, odds are you're going to have to fight tooth and nail to get a lot of these mid-tier values that would very typically be there if everybody's spending early. And it's super easy to do. You get a spreadsheet to do all the calculation for you, and bang, you're not messing around with the calculator, you're not doing anything. It's right there.
Yeah, I like to create my tiers with the dollar value that I would spend for that tier, and then I rank them within the tier, and I've got my highlighter. I make little stars. That's what I do, but little star beside this guy, and then I completely eliminate guys I just don't want. So even if he's in Slim's tier 2, if I hate him, I'm just not even going to include him on there. So it's just the guys I'm targeting. And I could care less if someone puts them up or takes them off. There's not a lot of guys that I do that with, but I have them ranked within the tiers, so I kind of know, I kind of see where it's going. And then, I write down the dollar values for the guys in those tiers, so then you can see where you're going to have to bid to get these guys, or when you do all of a sudden find that great deal like Julio Jones for $38, well, all right, I got to rework my budget. I'm not going to be getting the guys in this tier, or maybe it's the bottom end rather than the top end of that tier or whatever. So, I mean, it's all that work. And that's why the auction's fun, too, is because every single pick means something down the road, right? So you're always engaged.
Oh, totally. We've talked about it many times. It's the ultimate control. It's the same as saying, if I'm doing a snake draft, give me 3 first-round picks, and then I don't pick again till after round 10. You could do that if you wanted to in an auction draft, even though with the players that you're getting, even though we're not doing rounds, obviously. But that's the strategy, that you could do if you wanted to, take in your studs and take in your pluggers and hoping for the best. But you can't do that in a snake draft. It's impossible. So this is why auctions, to me and to you guys, I know they're a much better way to draft. And if you've done one, I don't know how you can go back to doing a snake draft.
Yeah, I agree.
Up a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, it can be quicker, it can be less work, it can be those types of things too, right? But speaking of auction drafts, we've now set up our first fan league. Slim got it all set up on ESPN. It turns out that I'm doing the drafting on that, and I'll be playing in that league on Saturday night. We're drafting. Slim, did you set it for public so people like you, while you're single parenting, can watch along?
It's public. I plan on being there, and who knows, I could be there right from the beginning if the wife, her golf excursion might get rained out. So
true.
Who knows? I'll be there for as much moral support as you can handle, probably.
Good.
It's public though.
I'm excited to see how it goes. It's going to be fun to get to know some of our fans and our listeners a little bit better as the season rolls on too. We've got a nice little cash prize set up for, well, I guess a credit prize, cash prize for first, second, and third as well. So we're excited about that, and the guys at Fantasy Sports View for helping us out with that. And it's exciting stuff. So we got that coming up on Saturday, and then Sunday, boys, and this I was just going to transition into it. Wow, I was going to wait. Maybe I'll wait for it because I wanted to go through your tiers first and then see how they tweak for the dynasty. So let's do that. Blister, I just was looking through your tiers and what you have in the draft kit, and I don't know, maybe you have 100 receivers set up in your tiers, and your tiers are definitely have greater numbers in them than Slim does. Talk to us a little bit about how you set up your tiers and what you're looking for when you're tiering your players.
Well, I was looking at when I first set them up, I hadn't mocked or anything yet. I was kind of looking at what I predicted these guys would do based on past success, past stats, and stuff like that. And yeah, I have 9 guys in tier 1. But when I look at the stats from last year, and we'll throw, I have Julio Jones in there, who I won't include his stats because he was injured and stuff. But the rest of these guys scored top top end was 319 fantasy points down to, in 8th place anyways, was 296. So we were looking at 20 points difference between 1 and 8. And that basically means just barely over 1 point per game fantasy-wise. So that's why I have them all ranked right there. I mean, Alshon was just a little bit off. He was at 283. So if you go from 319 down to 283, that's about 36-point difference. That's just over 2 points a game. But really, he could be easily in there at the, fighting with these guys for wide receiver top 10 status next year, no problem. So when I looked at it, I looked at the results from last year. Based on what I think they should do this year, Josh Gordon, obviously I have a couple stars beside him. We don't know what the verdict is yet. I do assume he's going to be missing sometime, if not the whole season. It's too bad because he was a fantasy stud last year. So that's really going to hurt Cleveland, and it's going to hurt a lot of fantasy owners. So I did trade him already in one league where I could trade him. So, but that's why I have so many guys in there, and I think those guys definitely have that potential to repeat those high numbers. Pushing close to 300 fantasy points again this year. So that's why they're all in my big tier 1.
And so, Slim, you basically have the same guys as Blister, but split between your tier 1, tier 2. What are some things that you're looking at when you're grouping these guys together?
I try to go by points more so than auction value dollars. For me, I find it works better to make my tiers and then compare them to my auction values. I can kind of, then I can look and, like I said, and see, hey, this guy is going, say, for $25 with these other players, but I have him ranked considerably higher. So I think he's going to do, outperform that position. He's a guy I want to focus on, things like that. So, yeah, I try, like I said, go by points, projections that I'm going to have them finish at. And also, I kind of like to look back and say, over the last few years, say, how many guys broke 200 points? How realistic is it for, say, 20 players to break 200? Well, it's probably not, so then that helps me, adjust things in my tiers as well, to kind of limit or have a rough idea how many players should fit into each tier.
Okay, so ranking them first, tiering them after that. I'm kind of more of the guy that I kind of tier them and then look at the value at that tier, and I value them in there rather than make my list and value them all and then find them in tiers. I put them in a list and look at them and say, I think this is the natural break. I put them in rank first and then tier them and then value the tier. It's kind of the way that I go through things. So just looking at your tiers, guys, I mean, for the most part, they're pretty close. I mean, give or take some of those later guys as far as rankings go, but a couple of them, just looking at them quickly, really jumped out to me as far as tier placement. I didn't go through and count because Blister has a lot more guys on his list. So, but just as far as tiers go, let's take a look. Blister, Julian Edelman, you have him as a tier 3 receiver. Is this PPR strictly, or is that where you're placing him? As of today, anyways.
Yeah, as of right now, I'll keep him in tier 3. I mean, last year in PPR he finished 14th, but I think in regular scoring he finished 18th. So, I mean, he's definitely a wide receiver too. But I know even in drafts I've been in, I don't even know if he'll cost you as much as I have this tier ranked at $19 to $29. He's definitely not going to cost you at the top end of that tier. And he, you might even, I have a feeling you'll probably get him for under 19 even. You'll probably be looking at between 12 and 19 probably realistically what you might have to pay for him. So, I mean, that's pretty darn good value for a guy who, he had 105 catches, I think it was last year. And I really don't see him not being Brady's favorite target this year. And if anything, if the receiving core around him gets better or Gronkowski gets better, some of these other guys might maybe open up some more space for him to do more with the ball once he gets it as well. So I think he should still put up really solid numbers. I think they're in line. I think we talked a bit about it before, but we said Brady could have, he could be a really undervalued quarterback this year who's had more time to work with his receivers, and I think all of them could produce better, and it'll help Edelman if that's the case.
So, Slim, you have him in your 5th tier, right at the top of the 5th tier. Talk to us about why you have him all the way down there.
Well, I'm not as sold. I think there's a few extra mouths to feed maybe this year. I think Gronk sounds like he's on pace to be back fairly early into the season. Obviously, that's a big target factor here, especially when you get into the red zone. He should chew into Edelman's production from last year quite a bit. I also expect Dobson to kind of break a little bit this year, so I think he can cut into Edelman's production a lot. I agree, though, he is probably Brady's favorite target right now, other than Gronk for sure. But if Amendola can somehow stay healthy, there's all of a sudden another person to feed there, and then we're talking about guys like Vereen, who hopefully will play a full season this year, which he didn't last year. And then even somebody like Kenbrell Tompkins, he could see the field a little bit, and another year under his belt, hopefully gets a little bit more production. Now all of a sudden, there's, to me, more receiving threats that they had than they had last year. So I'm not sold that Edelman gets quite as many targets or receptions as he had last year, and I think he definitely loses out on a lot of red zone touches if Gronk is healthy too. So that, for me, that's why I've kind of bumped his value down a little bit.
So, Slim, dollar value-wise, what are you willing to spend for Edelman? And maybe you're not targeting, but what would you be willing to spend on him? Is like $15? Is that the range?
Yeah.
Is it $10?
Sure, something exactly kind of in that range. I think right now that's kind of more or less his average price that I've seen. But I wouldn't be shocked if you, like Lister said, got him for cheap. If you got him for under $10 in some drafts, I don't think that would be shocking either. But I mean, if I got him for that, for sure, I would jump on him. If I could get him as a wide receiver 3, as somebody who I could mix in as a wide receiver 3, I'd be fairly happy with that.
Okay, so Blister, let's say you got $15 left, and you can get Edelman or Jeremy Maclin. So we're kind of name gaming here.
That's a gamble. I'd probably take Edelman, even though Macklin potentially could be the number 1 there. I just haven't really seen it from him yet, so I think Edelman might be safer.
Okay, same thing, Edelman or Golden Tate?
I'm going to go with Tate. I think he's in line for a big year. He has Calvin across from him, so he should be open a lot. Offensive likes to throw the ball, less mouths to feed.
Okay, Slim, how about Edelman or Mike Wallace?
Edelman, did you say, sorry?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll say Edelman. I personally think the Dolphins are gonna have a lot of trouble this year. Wallace is sinking down my rankings kind of right now.
Okay, and then I'll throw out the same one as Blister, Edelman or Golden Tate, just because he's going to be a popular name out there.
I agree with Blister. I like Tate.
Okay, good. So let's move on to someone else. I saw that it was in a different tiers for the two of you. Blister, you've got T.Y. Hilton sitting in your second tier. Sorry, do you have him? Yeah, you have him in your second tier. Yeah, talk to us about why you're higher on T.Y. than who we'll say Slim is later.
Well, I just think that he's a pretty young receiver with big speed, and he was a big play maker. He kind of lacked consistency, unfortunately, but he's going. He's got another year under his belt. They brought in Hakeem Nicks. They have Reggie Wayne, who's not getting any younger. So I just think that he's the youngest, most explosive receiver they have. Hopefully, with Reggie Wayne and Nicks there, maybe they draw a bit of attention, but potentially. By now, I would hope that Luck has established a good rapport with T.Y. Last year he had 83 grabs, just over 1,000 yards and 5 TDs. So, he ranked as a low-end wide receiver 2 last year. And if you add up the guys I have ahead of him, that would still put him in the wide receiver 2 range where I got him slotted at the lower end of the bottom of tier 2. So he's should be a good solid wide receiver 1. I'd like to see more consistency. I don't know that he'll put up a heck of a lot more numbers than he did last year, but it would be nice to see him make a few more grabs and maybe get in the end zone 2 or 3 more times. That would help his numbers out quite a bit.
So around that $30 range, you think is a fair price for him?
You know what? I don't think you'll have to pay anything close to that. I think I've been seeing him going for single-digit dollars in the auctions I've been in so far, which is quite surprising because I think he's worth more than that. I think he's a guy that he'd be worth you'll probably in an auction later on in the year, like closer to August, he's probably going to cost you $15 to $20, I'm sure. But right now, he's going really cheap.
So I think you said a few things that are going to be the reason why Slim has him ranked a lot lower into his tier 4. I could hear Slim talking while you were talking in my head on why he's going to answer why he has him in tier 4. Go ahead, Slim.
Well, if you look at our tiers too, really,
sheer numbers.
He's only 5 positions lower than where Blister has, and I still have him as a low-end wide receiver too. I got him 23rd, so I think a lot of what Blister says is true. I think he is a low-end wide receiver too. I think that Reggie Wayne and Akeem Nicks will definitely hurt his value, even though Wayne is inconsistent, coming off an injury, and Nicks is inconsistent. But I think that Wayne is the more reliable option for Andrew Luck. To me, T.Y. Hilton's awesome for best ball because he's boom or bust, because he's that deep threat option. Until he shows that he can kind of run the more intermediate stuff, I have to limit his value and keep guys like Michael Floyd and even Michael Crabtree ahead of him, just because I think there will be certain weeks where he just doesn't show up. It's such a low percentage pass, the deep pass, that if you miss it twice in a game, that might be the only chances you get. So, like I said, I think there'll be times where he doesn't show up in certain weeks. But man, when he's on, he can be a real one tough cover. But that's kind of where I have him. Like I said, if he starts to show kind of more intermediate stuff, I think for sure he can become a high-end wide receiver too. I don't think it'll be tough for him to get into the wide receiver 1 range, though, with just some of the names that he's got to jump over, barring injuries and stuff like that.
Well, Slim, let's stay with it, because you just brought up a name as I look at each of your tiers here that may be interesting to talk about. Why would you be interested in Michael Floyd ahead of T.Y. when it comes to your draft?
Because I think that the way he finished last year, I just think he's poised to. He outperformed Fitzgerald last year, and I think the sky is kind of the limit for him, and he's just going up, and Fitzgerald is going down. And not to say that Fitzgerald won't be productive, but Michael Floyd has one of the best mentors in the NFL, and he's going to be on the field a ton. He's guaranteed to be on the field just about every passing play, whereas T.Y. Hilton, he's probably the third guy coming off of. I think Nicks could see in certain 2 wide receiver sets. I think Nicks will be the guy in the field, where Hilton is kind of more a slot guy. Maybe he gets to the outside once in a while in certain formations, but Nicks is stuck on the outside. And Reggie Wayne to me is an outside receiver, so it kind of can minimize the times that Hilton gets on the field, whereas Floyd, to me, the sky is the limit for him this year. He could be a wide receiver 1, in my opinion, this year.
So Blister, you have Michael Floyd 13 slots below Ty. Why do you have him down in that tier 4 range?
Well, I don't know that it's not. I agree with Slim. I think he is poised for a big year. I just have him down there because I see, and I don't even think he's costing that much money. That's in my $10 to $18 range, and I don't even think he'll cost you that much money. But he could be one of the best values in that tier for sure, because he finished last year 25th ranked, but like he is definitely trending up, and his value. I mean, he's not gonna cost you a lot of money. I don't think, no matter what happens in your draft. But he's definitely a guy you should target, because he could definitely be finishing up here as a high-end wide receiver 2 or a low-end wide receiver 1. He's got that potential. So yeah, I don't know. Right now, no particular reason. I guess coming in, Ty last year was coming off a year. If you're thinking about a draft, and some guys, are notorious for thinking about the previous year and forgetting maybe all the scenarios that put a person in a particular place. But Ty got into the limelight because Reggie Wayne was gone, and he got more looks probably because of that. So that's why I have him potentially costing you more money than a guy like Floyd, who, on us, for the most part, unless you're a fan of a team from the West Coast, like Slim, like Seattle, you'll pay attention to what's going on in that division more so. But when you're over here and the rest of the country, you don't really notice them as much. So Michael Floyd's a guy that could fly under a lot of people's radars, and again, pick up cheap and get great production from him.
So speaking of cheap or non-existent, Slim, looking through your tiers, rookie wide receivers, not really on your list. Talk to us about that.
Well, anyone who's listened to this pod for a while knows kind of my disdain or reluctance for rookie wide receivers, and I see, Sammy Watkins, and I honestly don't remember if I intentionally did that or if that was just an oversight. He wouldn't have been high if I did, but I just have a hard time trusting rookie wide receivers. It's a hard position to learn. It's so different from college, and for Sammy Watkins, he's going into a situation where Buffalo's not really known for their prolific passing, we'll say. So I look at other rookies. To me, Brandon Cooks, Jordan Matthews, those guys can outperform Sammy Watkins this year. Mike Evans, I don't know. I just see a hard time with him getting the volume week in and week out. We don't get too many consistent receiving options coming out of Buffalo. They're kind of more run first. No one can argue his talent, but it's situational, and he's going to have some growing pains probably in the NFL. We saw it with Tavon Austin last year. If they're not used correctly, and don't get me wrong, I don't think that he's in the same boat as Tavon as far as skill goes. I think he's better and more well-rounded, but I still think that his production's going to be limited, and I like somebody like Jordan Matthews ahead of him just because of volume. Brandon Cooks, obviously, his playmaking ability and the fact that he was kind of handpicked by Sean Payton to come into this offense, that tells you that hopefully he's going to be used quite a bit. And Mike Evans, he's just a big dude, and I think he can be a big red zone target. And I'm not sure how many touchdowns Sammy Watkins can really score unless he's breaking something for 60 or 50 yards or something like that. But I mean, if I had to put him in there, he'd definitely be kind of my tier 6 with guys like Jordan Matthews and Kenny Stills and DeAndre Hopkins and those kind of guys. But yeah, I mean.
Okay.
He's just kind of got cursed kind of going to Buffalo this year.
Yeah. Blister, you don't mind him so much. You have him ranked in your 4th tier. Do you see him going right now in your mocks in that $10 to $18 range, or is that just where you're projecting him?
That's where I projected he'd go. I mean, a lot of the rookies come with that hype, and so you end up spending more on them. Like every year, like this year, Sammy Watkins and all these names are big. Last year, like Slim said, it was Tavon Austin and some of these guys that obviously don't tend to put up the numbers to go with the hype. So I have them in there. I probably would not be willing to spend any of the money. Like I'd rather spend in that same tier. I'd rather spend it on Floyd and Shorts and Kendall Wright and Terrence Williams, Kenny Stills. I'd rather invest in those guys that have been around the league a bit, and I think it's a little safer investment. But I just think that, they could potentially go for double-digit dollars.
Okay, so now staying with rookies and talking about potential, that's the segue into this weekend. We have our big brand new dynasty startup. What type of things, that's just because we're flipping back and forth, go to you, Slim. What type of things are you looking for in this draft? That not because I want you to give away stuff, but just, in the wide receiver position, I guess it could be in particular, or strategy in general, rookies versus those second, third year players versus Andre Johnson. What are you anticipating going forward here?
Well, I think we're gonna see a lot of people really spending big on rookies, I would think. And not to say that's incorrect. I don't think that it is, but I think and I'll be the first to admit, limited dynasty experience, I think people a lot of times overvalue youth. And
the dynasty part of it, yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to say, like, I'm not saying to go out and buy somebody like Anquan Bolden. I mean, obviously that just is stupid to try and build a team around old guys. You got to find the mix, right? And this is why guys like AJ Green are valuable and Demarius Thomas are valuable at the wide receiver position because they're young. You'll see Randall Cobb go fairly high because he's young. But Sammy Watkins. Yeah, and the thing is, this going into a dynasty. You take a rookie now. You're not necessarily expecting huge production from him this year, right? You're doing it for down the road, and you're looking at risk management. So is he going to be a viable option in 5 years or 3 years or maybe even further down the road? And that's what you have to weigh. So if you feel like Watkins is more valuable than, say, Randall Cobb in 3, 5, 10 years, whatever, then, yeah, you make that pick. And time will tell, right? There's no real knowing right or wrong at this stage. It's all going to be how you value the risk of it behind drafting somebody that young. But I have a feeling that people are going to put a priority on a lot of this youth, which will hopefully leave some of these more veteran guys later on in the draft. So if it's me, I'm going to try and build with talented youth, obviously, like everybody else. Yeah. But I'm not going to be scared to plug some holes with some aging kind of players. Someone like Andre Johnson, for example. I have no problem taking him. I'll probably be able to get him fairly cheap in our dynasty draft, but I have no problem taking him and using him for a couple seasons because I think he still has a couple seasons in him. And you know what? 2 years or 3 years from now, I'll draft a rookie to fill his spot, right, or hopefully have that addressed at some point. So I'm kind of, I think, maybe at the leaning towards the other end of the spectrum as far as aging players don't tend to scare me as much in drafts like these as I think a lot of other people do.
Okay, so Blister, what are you thinking as far as auction dynasty strategy? Because we haven't seen this yet, right? You and I have been working in ECL. It's been snake draft, but this auction element could change some things, huh?
Well, it's really going to change stuff. I mean, not just dynasty, but we also have to look at IDP. Right. I mean, that's I was talking with Slim about that and how some of these IDP guys are as valuable as a wide receiver 1 and a running back 1. I mean, but I don't think anybody's going to be worried about saving too much money to spend on them. I think they're going to go fairly cheap unless it's a stud linebacker from your favorite team. You might realize how valuable he is, but for the most part, most of these guys aren't going to think about that. So that could be good. I mean, if nobody's saving money for that, then that means we also can spend money on our skill positions. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, you have to look at everything like Slim said. I mean, there's guys like Calvin Johnson's 28 and versus Randall Cobb who's 23. Does that mean you're going to shy away from Calvin Johnson? Well, not if the price is right. And what I don't know is, I mean, this dynasty that we're starting up, we know a lot of the guys that are in it. I don't know how many of them are going to have their head wrapped around it by Sunday that this is dynasty, so in that sense, Calvin Johnson gets thrown on the board. Is he still going to go for $50? You can't really you can't afford for him to go for $50 with the amount of guys you need to fill. But at the same time, if you can get Calvin Johnson on your team, there's a price that's going to be too much. I mean, if you can have him on your team, I wouldn't shy away from him because of age, but at some point, $50 is going to be, if it's a redraft year, yeah, it might not be too bad. But $50 in a dynasty, I think you're definitely going to sell yourself short at a lot of positions.
Well, and I think the interesting part too is this dynasty is it's deep rosters too. Slim, we're doing 30 or 35 rounds.
35 rounds. Yep.
Of auction?
Yeah.
Yep.
What time is it starting at?
Well, it's not live. That's the other thing, right? It's not live. It's online, so we'll go quicker then.
Well,
is it live? No.
Well, it's online. No,
yeah, but we're not like
slow draft or anything.
But we're not in the same room together.
No.
No,
you'll have to have a shower and stuff.
In between?
Well, that's what I said to everybody when I said, let's pick the date. And I said, it's going to take and Everybody was fine with doing it on Sunday. That's when everyone wanted to do it. I thought everyone would want to do it Saturday because if you were up till 2 a.m. doing it, you didn't have to work the next day. But Sunday...
Well, I don't have to work the next day, so...
Well, I mean, that's why I was like, I don't care.
Me neither. Me neither. So you think you'll pause it every couple hours? Say, hey, if you need to take a washroom break, now's the time to do it. Can you pause it for...
It's a good question. I don't know. But, yeah.
Good if you could.
Just run your laptop with you right into the dumper and...
You might have to,
you gotta do, I guess, eh?
That's true. I'm gonna need like order
a catheter or something.
Just a big
like
pail.
It's gonna take. It could take 10 hours.
Wow, but you gotta think though. It's gonna be a long time, but think how many $1 players are gonna be. Half the players drafted will be $1.
Yeah.
Right? So that's quick. It's not like we're bidding. It's going to be $1.
Some of them could still be in high school.
What, players?
Yeah. You have to dig deep.
If it's in the database, then yeah.
Then away you go, the devies. So
yeah, but you also got to think, too, if you're starting 6 IDP guys, you're going to probably draft 9.
Yeah.
So there's a third of your roster is just going to go for defense. So you're not really drafting that many more skill position players, really.
Yeah.
When you're losing a third of your roster for IDP.
Right, and it's dynasty, so
it's not as you're thinking, holy crap, 35 round. Like it's not going to be as bad. I know I thought that too, and then I'm thinking, well, I started crunching the numbers to figure out how big to make the rosters. I'm like, well, let's take 10 right off the bat for IDP players, and well, then now we're at 25, and you guys have done a dynasty. That's not a crazy roster size, I don't think.
Right.
So if you take a defensive lineman, say, and he gets hurt, and you don't have one on your taxi squad, can you just drop him altogether and waiver wire a guy still?
Oh yeah. Yep. Everything works like that too. It's just you always have the option of the taxi squad if you choose to go that route. Yeah.
All right. So draft kit, head on over to the website, defensefootballauction.com/draft kit. Check it out. Free sneak peeks on there. You can take a look at some of the stuff Slim's been working on for the latest update. We also have 2 new articles over on the website as well that have been up in the last week, so check those out. We have the Fan League draft on Saturday night, so if you're sitting around doing a mock somewhere, trying to learn some stuff, don't be afraid to visit the ESPN site. The Slim, I'm sure you can tweet out the room or something so guys can kind of watch that. And then we'll tweet some picks out too, just so that guys know, that are listening or following along with what the fans are picking and what my team looks like. And then Sunday night, the big startup auction dynasty. If you're up in the wee hours of the morning, follow some Twitter. I'll tell you that I drafted someone for $1 that you may or may not have heard of, so that could be interesting. And the IDP aspect is definitely going to make things interesting. It's tough to find too much out there strategy-wise and whatnot when it comes to this, and zero in the way of auction.
I was just going to say, if you can find an IDP auction ranking, send it to it, just because I want to shake the guy's hand that came up with this. Because, I mean, we're auction specialists, and I can tell you, right now, I cannot envision any way in hell of us ever making an IDP auction value ranking. I mean,
there's got to be a way, but maybe after we do it, we can. Well, hey, maybe after we do it, we'll at least have some value so we can throw them on the site so other guys can follow along, right? And take a look and say, oh, that's what the going rate is for whatever, right? Yep. Can't hurt. Right. Can't hurt. So anyways, lots of stuff to follow along. My wife was already like, hold on, you're doing 2 drafts this weekend? I thought football season is in the fall. I'm like, yeah, but drafting is all year long, baby. So I didn't use
Happy anniversary.
Part. Yeah, I didn't use this baby part because she would have slapped me, but
slapped her.
With the 5 fingers hit in the face. No? Anyways, that's probably enough wide receiver talk. Next week, we're gonna recap, I guess, some things that we saw in the draft. Are we going to go running back straight away next week, or should we just talk some strategy stuff from what we learned on the Dynasty?
Let's recap the drafts, the 2 drafts, and talk
because
tight ends.
I think, because tight ends.
Short.
That's a good call. And then because we want running backs to be all by itself because it's always the biggest pot out there.
That's right.
All right.
Yep.
So good enough. Slim, I'll see you in the school on Thursday. I got the green light to come in and visit while you're teaching summer school. Yeah.
And it's not teaching yet. I'm just there getting my ducks in a row.
Okay. Well, I did that with
umbrellas now.
Oh, yes, that's right. Many umbrellas. And Blister, I'm not golfing this week, but next week because I got too much soccer to play this week. Anyway, so feel free to come out and cheer us on, Blister.
Well, thanks, man. I'll see if I can fit it in the schedule. I got to go. See you guys later.
Well, you got to work in the morning. Get the hell out of here.
I got to get up early, yeah.
I'll see the rest of you when it's springtime
Later,
in the
boys.
Rockies.